Hello everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get the glass on the back of the tank. We will get started with our stream. Alright, that's decent, not perfect, but better. Couldn't be the stream with that glass bothering me. Hello everyone. Look, Variant, you are first. Good job. So we have three different topics today. I was looking through Club Milo's Reef at today's conversations, and I saw three different subjects that I felt we needed to discuss. And they're in no particular order, but I just thought, you know, when we cover these live streams, we talk about a lot of different topics, and when we do it, we cover them thoroughly because we talk about them for about 45 minutes or so. But we've been live streaming for about 3 years, so we've covered everything. But at the same time, there's new people that come in the hobby, and there's other people that heard the topic in the past but maybe didn't pay attention as much. So by covering it a second time or a third time, there's a good chance that you're going to benefit from something you didn't pick up the first time. So that is why we're doing this. The first topic is going to be about winter and heaters and cold houses and tanks. So one person in Club Milo's Reef, and I'll put this up on the screen to remind you guys, and yes, I have not approved people to join the club recently, so I've got a bunch of people waiting. I will definitely do that today, okay? I swear. So the first person said that their tank got down to 70 degrees, and it turns out their heater had failed. So what I want to talk about with you for a little bit is about heaters. Now, you can use any brand you like. I mean, there's many kinds on the market. Some are going to be better than others, but a heater is a heater. It doesn't really, if you buy one heater, it's not going to heat the tank more than the other one. You know, it's not that kind of deal, or one's better in that regard. But it could be that a certain brand of heater has a better reputation or a better longevity. And so a lot of us like to buy things once and not rebuy it. I like the Eheim Jaeger. I've been using them for a long time. Before that, they were called Ebo Jaeger. I guess they were bought up by Eheim. And I really like that heater. It's a glass heater. The ones I have are probably 18 inches long or so. I have three 300-watt heaters in my sump. And someone might say, well, why not just have one 1,000-watt heater? Well, the reason is if a 1,000-watt heater gets stuck in the on position, it would have the ability to overcook my tank if I didn't have any kind of safety parameters in place. Now, I do, but I still want to be careful, and so I like to divide up my heaters across multiples rather than relying on a single point of failure. Because if the heater fails and doesn't turn on, the whole tank is cooling off while I desperately seek out another 1,000-watt heater. If I have one stick in the on position, like I said, it could overheat the tank. But what I did with mine, and you can do with yours if you have a controller, is you can set up something to let you know the tank is getting too hot. So if your controller on your tank has a thermometer, and it has internet, or at the very least it has an additional outlet that can come on if something has happened. You could even have a light, like a big red light bulb right above your aquarium that turns on when something's wrong. And so if your tank is getting too hot, the light bulb comes on, you get a text, you get an email, maybe you hear something chiming, you know, through a speaker. You know, there's a lot of different alarms that people buy these days, you know, either as add-ons to the Apex system, or they found something on Amazon they were able to repurpose to be useful. So having something to tell your tank is too cold or too hot is a great plan. If you're not going to go that route, or you just haven't purchased a controller because you think your system doesn't need it, you know, you think your system's too small, it wouldn't make sense financially, you can buy something called the Big Temp Alert. It's about this big, and it's got a huge thermometer on the front. You can stick it right above your tank to where you look over and you can see the number on the screen any time of day or night just by looking at it. And at the very least, you could glance at it and say, yes, all is well. But If you're not in the room or if you're visiting family, if you're at work, you have no idea what's happening on that screen and it would make a difference. So we really do recommend controllers because they help you maintain stability in your tank. Now, when you are programming your controller, you can say if temperature is above a certain set point. Like let's say your tank, if it's greater than 82 degrees, do this. On my tank, it turns off the metal halides because the metal halides give off a lot of heat. So the tank goes dark, which is my red light bulb. It's like, why aren't the lights on? That's weird, it's daytime. And I verify the tank has gotten too warm. I can also notice at that point, I've probably got notifications on my watch, my cell phone, and my computer all saying, the tank's too warm or it's gone over 82 degrees. And then I have to do something to resolve it. If the tank gets too cold, it's not going to turn the metal halides on, even though that would be a funny move, but it would not be good for the reef or the fish. So I just have it notify me. Now, the general rule of thumb when it comes to heaters is 3 watts per gallon. So if you have a 100-gallon tank, you need 300 watts. My system is 450 gallons of liquid volume, so technically I need even more wattage than I use, but I've been running 900 watts of heat for the last, 5-6 years, and the tank's never had to struggle to get up to temperature. I did look into, using, if I added more wattage, would it lessen how long they have to run? But mathematically, it turns out to be a wash. The watts it takes to warm up water are just what they need. So if you go with more watts, which costs you more in electricity, it turns out a little sooner, but it still was more electricity being consumed at one time. So by having them run a little bit longer to get the temperature up, it's still a wash. I had some people that are smarter than me do the math, and they're like, yeah, it makes no difference. So if you want to add another heater, and if your circuit breaker can handle the additional heater, because think about that, every single thing you plug in to that power strip or to your controller goes into a circuit breaker that you're sharing with other things. And you know what I'm talking about because many of you have like 16 items with 2 outlets in the wall. So we have to be careful that we don't overtax the circuit breaker. And by adding another heater and another heater and another heater, when they all come on at once, it could physically make the breaker pop and then turn everything off in the aquarium, which would be just as detrimental than letting the tank get too cool. So we want to make sure that you have enough amperage coming into the room where the aquarium is to support the heaters. But you've got your 3 watts per gallon, and then I would divide it across 2 heaters at the minimum, or in my case, I do it across 3 heaters. So if we needed 300 watts of heat, a couple of 150 watt heaters would be perfect for your aquarium. The benefit of the smaller wattage heaters is they typically are shorter in length and they fit in spots like within your sump. A lot of times people buy these sumps for their tanks and then they get their heater and this heater won't fit anywhere. It's too long, they put it diagonal, but there's this weird thing in the way and they can't put their skimmer where it belongs and it becomes a real hurdle. So you want to make sure that the heaters you buy are going to fit your tank in some place. We typically don't want to put them in the display because it's not pretty to look at. Some people like to hide them in the overflow box because the water goes over and into the overflow box. The heater is doing its thing and it drains down to the sump and they just are doing their job out of sight. That is a method that can work. I've done it in the past myself, but I prefer to have them down in the sump where I can see them so I can see when they turn on or off. Now, to test a heater, the simplest thing is to, if you have a controller, is to tell the controller turn on heater number 1 and then go check the heater. See if the light came on, put your hand around and see if it feels warm. Then switch it back to auto. Then you want to go to the next heater, turn it to on. And again, check the light, see how it feels, and then switch it to auto. Or, you know what, switch it to off and make sure it turned off. Because you want to verify that the heater is turning on and off as on demand. And then you want to verify with your hand that it feels warm to the touch when it's on. You also want to feel it when it's off to make sure it's not still heating water with the little light is burned out. So I want to make sure everything's working correctly. And if you have any doubts about the heater, or if the heater looks like it has water inside of it, or if the cord is brittle, if there's anything that you don't trust about it, just get a new one. Just replace it. If you want to replace both at the same time, you can. You can put it in your notes and reef trace so you don't forget when you added these heaters, so you know how old they are. One day you're like, well, how long have I had these heaters? So make yourself a note. If you don't have the app and you prefer like a journal, keep in your journal, or if you have one of those what do you call it, the label makers, you could actually print and put on the side of your stand, heater purchased and the date. I mean, these are little things we like to know, especially when it comes to warranties. And so that is the rule. We want to make sure they're working. Now, if your tank gets too cold, what is the solution? It's to warm it up. And in theory, you would get your heater back in order and get things working. But let's say your heater doesn't work and you can't get one this minute, but you're going to send someone to the store to buy one, or you're doing something from Amazon. I don't know. Whatever it is you're doing, how do you warm up the tank water now? One of the things I've done in the past when I was in a pinch is I actually took water out of the tank and I put it on the stove to bring it up to heat. I actually, not boiling, but I got it really, I saw the steam coming off, and then I poured it into an area of the tank that I felt was safe. Whether it was the sump or the overflow box, I didn't pour it directly into the reef because I don't want to hit a whole cloud, even if it's a gallon of hot water that some fish could swim through, and let's just say it would be unpleasant for them. I don't know that it would scald them, but probably would because they're not expecting such a jump. But by heating up some water and pouring the tank and doing this periodically, you can warm up your tank again. Just cocooning it and putting foam around it, like a sheet on top to stop evaporation, that isn't a method for warming up water. That is just a way to maintain the water temperature in a power outage. So I wouldn't say do that. But heating up water and adding to the tank and stirring it in, mixing it in is the best approach. And that way you can kind of get things back on track while the heater's trying to do its job as well. But if you don't have one now, you should definitely have a backup heater sitting in the closet waiting for the day you need one. So that is our first topic. I hope that it helps you, and I want you also to know, when it comes to heaters, the knob on the top or the digital display on the side may not actually be correct. So if you, let's say you set it to 76 degrees, you want to verify that your tank is actually 76 degrees, because let's say it's 74. Well, if the tank is 2 degrees colder than you're setting it at 76, you would turn the heater up to 78, and now it'll stay at 76. See what I'm saying? I never trust the number on top. I trust the thermometer of my tank, and I set the heater to match that thermometer. And that is my method. I actually will take the heater, put it in the water, and I've got it submerged, and I'm twisting the end, where the knob is, and I don't even look at the number. I just watch the little light come on and off and on and off, and I try to get that sweet spot to where it's exactly about to come on. That's it. And then I can just determine what the tank temperature is, and if I need to twist it up a half a degree or 1 degree, I can just go and crank it up just slightly to get the right one. And now my heater is set and programmed for what I need, and I plug that into my controller, because the controller will turn off the power to the heater if something goes wrong. And that's how they're designed. They're designed to turn on the heater and turn off the heater, kill the power source to it, and that way the heater can never overcook your tank. And in all the years I've been in this hobby, I've never had a tank get too hot from the heaters. So this advice is really good. I hope you apply it. I'm going to look at some of the comments here before I jump to the next topic, since we're talking about heaters. Hal says, it's definitely a good thing to have backups whenever possible for critical functions such as heaters, return pumps, and lights. And Dennis says, I'm currently running 4 Eheim Jaeger 300-watt heaters in my 620-gallon system. The room is not being heated overnight, so they have to compensate through the night. But he does say Eheim Jaegers are the best. I really like that brand myself. Rick says, I have a 180-gallon tank that likes the house cool at night. I have 2 300-watt heaters and 150-watt heater on the apex. The temperature is spot on day and night, but I'm nervous if something were to go wrong. Yeah, if your house were to suddenly get really, really cold, your heaters may not be able to keep up. So owning another heater you can plug in for those emergency situations, like the central heat is out, would be really wise. And then you can plug it in, and you could even run it to a different outlet, hopefully. Have a really good extension cord. Don't use a little cheap lamp extension cord, or use a power strip with a long cord. Just get yourself a nice heavy-duty power cord and run that to a totally different circuit in the house, and you've added more heat. You can put 1 or 2 more heaters in the system to keep up. There was a guy here in our club that had one of these tanks that was called Zero Edge, and it was a really cool tank. A lot of us wanted them. Very few of us bought them because I don't think Zero Edge is still around. But the way it worked was the water filled to the actual top, and it would overflow down the walls into a trough on the outside edge. And the Zero Edge tank was beautiful because you were looking through this block of water. You just didn't see the walls of the tank. And it was really, really neat at trade shows. Some people bought them, and like I said, this club member had one. But he could not keep the water hot enough because all that surface area was exposed to the cool air of the room. And he put in so many heaters. And I remember it was insane. I mean, he was way beyond 3 watts per gallon. I think he was more like 8 watts per gallon trying to keep the tank warm, and just had a really hard time because the top was exposed, the sides were exposed, everything was exposed to fresh air. And so you have to make sure you have enough wattage to support your tank in your environment. So we want to make sure we get that right. All right, our second topic for today was another one that I saw in Club Miller's Reef, and that was about acclimating new fish. So I wanted to talk about the acclimation of new fish because I feel like it's an important topic. I feel like we just talked about this recently because I talked about my little bucket. But when you get a new fish, it's really important that as soon as you receive it, whether it came shipped to you or you bought it at the fish store, when you open the bag, you need to verify the salinity of the water in the bag, and then, of course, compare it to the salinity of your tank. So you would check the bag and you would check your tank. Just check your tank again. I know you know what your tank salinity is, but you just check it again just in case. And if they're really close, acclimation should be pretty quick. You can probably acclimate that fish within about 45 minutes and get it into the tank. But if you have a big disparity, like 1.019 to 1.026, or 1.021 to 1.026, that's a big difference for that fish. And so you need to bring it up more gradually. So in that scenario, it would be ideal if you could acclimate it into a bucket. You know, you put that fish in, float the bag to get it to start to get some temperature while you're getting your stuff set up. And that way it's not cooling off while you're doing things. And then you can go ahead and put the fish in the bucket. And I would recommend a little tiny heater, and I'd also add an air stone. And then you can start a drip or a trickle, whatever it is you like to do. If you're going to do something that's slow, like a drip, and this is going to be a 3-hour situation, you want to make sure that fish still has enough oxygen and that the water's not cooling off. Another thing I've done when I acclimated a new fish, I didn't just put the bucket on the tile floor because it's too cold. And so I put some kind of a piece of sheet foam underneath to insulate the bucket from the floor, just so it wouldn't, the floor wouldn't wick the heat right out of the bucket. So that way, if you have water dripping into the bucket at 79 degrees, you might discover, if you were to keep a thermometer there, like a digital thermometer that's accurate and is updating constantly, you can actually see the water cooling off hour after hour after hour. And then you're ready to put the fish in the tank, and so you've got the salinity right, but you move the fish in, and it goes from cold water straight into warmer water, and it's another shock. And we want to avoid shocking the new fish. It's already been stressed, it's been handled, it's been bagged, it hasn't been eating. It's been through a lot. And we want to be as gentle as we can with our new guys so that they will be okay and lower the stress level. But so that was my recommendation. Get yourself an air pump and get yourself a weighted air stone. They're actually different sizes. I went to Petco just to see what you could get off the shelf. And there was probably 8 different kinds, from a circle ring to the regular stone-looking thing. And get yourself a small air pump. Make sure you get a check valve. And I like to have the air pump above the bucket. That's just my preference, because that way, if for some reason there was a moment where the power went off to the air pump for some reason, it wouldn't siphon the water out of the bucket and leave the fish bone dry. So we want to make sure we have a check valve, or we get the air pump above the bucket so that it cannot back siphon, and you're adding air to the tank, into that body of water. Now, if it's a small bucket, you don't want a huge air stone just frothing the water. You need to keep everything right. So you're going to have to find a nice little air stone that works for your situation. You may not even have to put it all the way down into the water. It could be half in the water, half out. But by being weighted, it won't float at the surface. It'll actually sit under the water some to add some oxygen into the water. We definitely want to add air in a situation like that. And I really think the small heater is so important. And I found this little heater. It was like $8. It looks like a credit card with a cord. And I think it was rated for up to 5 gallons of water. So by putting that in there, it just keeps the water from getting too cold. It's not one you can control and turn on and off. It's just plugged in, and it just keeps the temperature from dropping. So I like that, and that way, if you're doing some kind of gradual acclimation, which is going to take hours and hours, you're keeping the livestock safe. But my preference for acclimating fish is ideally you buy fish and corals, from a fish store that has salinity close to your own. I mean, you can't tell them what to do, but maybe some of the stores near you do it. And they keep reef parameters, and so you can just come home and just a matter of doing a temperature acclimation where you float the bag. After about 20 minutes, you cut open the top, and then I take a little urine cup, the urine specimen cup, and I scoop some water out of the cup. I scoop some water out of the tank with the cup. I pour it in the bag. I wait 7 minutes, and I pour it in the bag, and I keep doing this over and over for about 45 minutes or 50 minutes, and then the fish is ready to go into the system. Now, once you've done that, then you should really put it in safety stop. I've been recommending this stuff for a long time because I know you don't have a quarantine tank. So if you don't do anything but just take the fish out of the bag and put it in your tank, you are just basically risking it all. You don't know what kind of weird disease you could introduce to your tank because you just did not do anything preventative. I really like Safety Stop. At least it's taking care of the external parasites. If there are internal parasites in the fish, it does not help for that. And it has to be a fish that has scales. So that is the only rule of Safety Stop. You can't put a scaleless fish in there. And so you'd have to look up what you're wanting. Like I called, I got this little tiny snowflake eel, and I'm pretty sure it's scaleless. And so I actually called Eric Cohen at Blue Life USA and said, hey, just verifying, snowflake does not go in Safety Stop, right? And he said no. So in that one scenario, you don't want to do that. Now, before you ask me where the snowflake is, I have no idea. I put in this little tiny guy the size of a pencil, and I haven't seen it since. So I'm hoping it'll just come out and be a friendly little guy later. But for now, it's a mystery if it's doing well or not. I just don't know. Safety Stop is really inexpensive. You can buy a whole bunch of packets. I sell them on my website for $5 each. Each half of the package is mixed with 1 gallon of tank water, and then your fish with the air stone and the heater move into a bath for 45 minutes. And it's a 2-part, and I have a video about it on this channel, which you can watch and understand. It's actually a really simple process. You go from acclimation straight to bath 1 and bath 2, and then it goes into what I suggest is the peacemaker. But if you want to put it right in your tank, at this point it goes in your tank. And if you're smarter than I am, you not only do the acclimation and the Safety Stop Part A and Part B, then you put it into a quarantine tank for observation for a couple of weeks before you put it in your aquarium. So those are the things I would recommend when it comes to fish acclimation. But I would not just set up a drip and just let it drip slowly, super slowly, because it's just too taxing on the fish, and I'm really worried about the water temperature as well as the oxygen level dropping. You could put some prime inside the acclimation bucket so that it could lock up ammonia or nitrite or nitrate that's happening just from the process of the acclimation. And finally, there was something else I wanted to tell you. I hate it when it's on the tip of my tongue, but I'm trying to finish a thought and I just lose the next one. But we definitely want to... See, it's not coming back. It's gone. If I think of it, I'll tell you in a minute. Yeah, that's where we're going to stop for Safety Stop with acclimation at this point. Dang it. I just know there was something I wanted to tell you. Oh, I know what it was. Yeah, I thought of it just in time while I'm still on the topic. The general rule of thumb when you're acclimating a fish is to double the water volume that was in the bag. So that typically will get you where you need to be, unless, like I said, salinity is way off. I recently bought a fish and the salinity was so far off, it just took forever. And I ended up, I did what I said, air stone a heater, and I let the bucket fill up with double the water, and then I verified salinity was still too low, and I dumped out the water and let it continue to trickle in, and I dumped that out, and I did it and did it. It took forever, and that fish didn't even make it. It just didn't work out. So that's why there's not this great, exciting story on Facebook about this fish. But I do want to say that normally, if you can double the water volume in the bag, that's usually sufficient acclimation for the fish. At that point, the temperature and the salinity should match. But in this case, we just got something that just didn't work out. Then the third topic for today, the unrelated. See, they're related in saltwater, but that's it. These are just 3 topics that came up, and I felt like they needed to be discussed. And that was that the fact that some people are still, well, some people are still dealing with cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is not an algae, even though it's called the blue-green algae, and it appears in all of our tanks. Okay, it just happens to all of us at some point. You're not doing anything wrong. It's a seasonal thing. It happens. It could be the time of year. It could be the way the sunlight's coming into the house. It could be the parameters are just exactly right to let the stuff take hold and bloom. And it's just a matter of getting rid of it. And a lot of people will debate this. I mean, I've read thousands of threads on this topic over the last 20 years. It comes up all the time. And cyanobacteria is not a big battle that's so hard to overcome. So I'm going to tell you what I recommend, and that way you can just solve the problem and move on with your life and not have to sit there and stress about it. Now, number one, you want to know that it's cyanobacteria. So you need to know what it looks like, and you need to know how to treat it. You need to understand how it works, because I've read lots of erroneous comments from people that thought they got it, and they really didn't. So number one, cyanobacteria tends to grow on the surface of the sand, sometimes on the rockwork, and it can't even get on corals and other areas. And it typically acts like a blanket. Most of us, especially in a tank that's not glowing blue, will see a reddish carpet. It can be blue, it can be green, it's less common, but typically we get this red stuff. And it will possibly have bubbles in it, and it definitely can be scooped off or blown off with a turkey baster, and these flaps of the stuff will blow around the tank. That's how you know it's cyanobacteria. The stuff appears during the daytime and vanishes at night. So it's photosynthetic. The lights are actually activating the photosynthesis within this bacteria, and that's what makes the red blanket. And then you look at your tank at night or when the lights are out, and you're like, wow, my sand's white. It looks great. Why does this stuff keep coming back every single day? That's typically cyanobacteria. Now, there's some other stuff, but I don't want to confuse the topic. We're staying on this one. And if you can take that stuff and scoop it together into a pile and siphon it out with some tubing, that would be the easiest approach. You can actually take a net and you can just kind of go along the surface of the sand and scoop out a big blanket of it as well. That's another method. But the thing is, you want to remove as much as you possibly can from the tank before you treat the tank. And then when it's time to treat, you use red cyano RX. And you can kind of see on the box here, there's some cyano right there. And it's not the best picture in the world, but it's a bacteria, not an algae. And I just don't want you guys to be confused by that. Now, if you siphon out all you can out of your tank, I want to show you this product. So I'm going to switch screens here. That screen, not my notes. And I have too much stuff in my way. So you can see it's a powder. It comes with a little tiny spoon, and you're going to follow the directions exactly. It's going to tell you to turn off your protein skimmer and stop running carbon, and you're going to mix this in a cup of water and pour it into the tank. Now, the thing about this product and ChemiClean, they both work equally well. I like them both. I have a recommendation here how to use it. So I'm just going to read it to you because it's worded well. To treat your tank with best results, it would be best to siphon out as much of the cyanobacteria out of your tank first. Reducing the volume of the red slime from the aquarium helps avoid issues. Be sure to point one power head at the surface to get strong rippling, which improves oxygenation of the water. Plugging in an air pump and air stone to add oxygen to the tank is another good idea, especially in tanks with low flow. So you are adding some oxygen to the water while you're treating, because we don't want to starve the fish of the oxygen they need. Turn off the protein skimmer and stop running carbon and GFO. This is my actual advice, okay? The tank can be treated for a day or night, it doesn't matter, and all of your livestock will be safe. While the tank is being treated, start mixing up a new batch of salt water because a big water change is next. Then after 72 hours, check the tank, and if cyano is gone, do a 25% or larger water change. If the cyano is still present, wait another 24 hours. If it's still present, treat the tank again. So I'm going to stop right there for a second. The reason that I'm telling you this is because a lot of times people will say, I put in the medication and then that night it was gone. Well, that's what it does anyway without medication, because it goes away at night and it comes back during the daytime. So people will erroneously think, I treated my tank and it was gone in a day, this is a miracle product, and then the next day it's back and they're like, oh, but I just told the world it's gone, and it's not. It's still here, and then they get all upset. They think they did something wrong. This stuff takes a few days to die. But if you're following this recommendation that I'm giving you, you can get rid of this in 3 to 5 days. So it's been 3 days. You've waited. I mean, literally, you put it in the tank, and then you count forward 72 hours, and you look at the tank. And if it's gone, it's gone. If it's still showing up, even if it's partially there, at that point, I'd be willing to put in the product again and wait 2 more days. So I'll go back to what I said here. And then once the cyano is gone, you're going to do a big water change. The bigger the better, because the product will cause your protein skimmer to overflow initially. Some people complain the overflow is going to overflow for a week or longer because they aren't handling it. Adjust the skimmer to the lowest water level in the body, and as the collection cup fills up with watery skimmate, toss it out and toss it out. Keep tossing out the skimmate and replenish the system with more salt water as much as you have to until the skimmer finally settles down. After a few hours, the skimmer should settle down finally. If microbubbles are getting the best of you, put on a filter sock in the output of the skimmer for the first day. So basically what I'm saying is you treat your tank, you solve the problem, and you move on with your life. There are lots and lots of threads that will say using this product or any other product is cheating, and you need to find the underlying cause, you need to increase flow, you need to feed less. And people do all those things first because they're so terrified of this product. And it's a big mistake because this is not a dangerous product. It's a very simple working solution. It's just like anything we do. You use something to fix the problem. And if you have to use it once or twice a year, is that cheating? No. Is it solving the problem? Yes. Do you get to enjoy your tank more? Yes. That's why I like it, and that's why I don't have any hesitation telling people to use it. I don't even have like horror stories to say, oh my God, watch out for this or watch out for that, because it works so well. Now, as I said in my recommendation, you need to siphon out as much as possible before you treat the tank. So if you see a whole bunch in the tank, don't just treat the tank and think that's going to magically solve it. This is a job that's going to require some effort on your part. You're going to have to get your hands wet. And if you do what I'm saying, you will avoid the potential. Out of like all the years I've seen people complain about cyanobacteria, there's been maybe 3 or 4 people that stated their tank turned pink and everything was dying. And that's because they had this monster amount of cyano and they put in this medication and it was all dying simultaneously and it just turned the water pink, which is insane. I've never seen that happen. And I think it's because I remove as much as I can from the tank before I treat. And that's how it should be with most problems we have. When we have a big problem with green hair algae, just throwing in 1,000 snails is not going to solve the problem. But if you rip out handfuls of algae and then put in 100 snails instead of 1,000, they will get what's left. And with the cyanobacteria, you scoop out and siphon out as much as you can, then you treat the tank to get rid of what's left, and it gets rid of it, and you don't have any kind of weird issue. There's nothing strange that happens in your tank, and a few days later you're happy. And I can tell you this is such a good thing to do because I've seen so many people say, I tried everything, I tried lights out, I tried this, I tried that, I've been battling this for 6 months, and finally I just tried this product Mark recommended, and a week later it was completely back to the way I used to like my tank, and they said I should have listened and I should have done this sooner. And that's the point I'm trying to make. We want to do it sooner. We don't want to sit here and hate our tank. We've had streams recently about reef depression and feeling defeated. And if you're looking at your tank and you're seeing something you don't like, you just need to get your arms in there and clean out the problem, and then put in the solution, whatever that might be, to handle the last of it. And in this situation, I think you guys can get the cyanobacteria under control, and it's not a lot of effort other than all the salt water you need, because scooping and siphoning is a pretty simple thing. Adding the product is easy. Waiting and not running the skimmer for a few days is easy. It's just once you restart the skimmer and it's just completely doing the volcano thing, that's the hassle. And so that's where you're dumping out all that watery skimmate because it just won't stop. And it could take 3 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours to settle the skimmer down, but just drain out every drop the skimmer pulls out. Just let it do it. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter how much it pulls out as long as you can put in enough salt water to replace what it's pulling out. So if you end up draining 15 gallons of watery skimmate that looks completely normal, and you can put in 15 gallons of salt water to keep the tank water level at the right height, at one point the skimmer will stop overflowing and it'll get back to its normal job, and you solved it that day. You don't have to wait a week to turn your skimmer on. So that's it for the 3 topics for today. We can actually get to your questions a little earlier than usual. All right, let me scroll up here. And then if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me now. Whenever you do your question, do add Mila's Reef so I can see it in the comments. And I'm going to tell you guys in advance, Merry Christmas. I do not plan to have a live stream next Saturday. So we get to have some time off with our families, and I hope that you open up gifts that you love, and that you guys have a great day. So let's see. Rob says, do you make sumps with a fleece roller mat already installed, or do you make a sump to accept the Clearacy? I've built some sumps that accept the Clearacy is the best description. I'm not actually trying to reinvent a sump that holds fleece and motors and all that kind of stuff. I don't even want to I don't even want to open that can of worms. But I can definitely set it up to where it has an additional drain line that goes straight down through a bulkhead and into your Clearacy. And I will make a stand to raise the Clearacy to the proper height in the skimmer section, so that way it is working at its optimal level. And so we would do some math to figure out what fits in your cabinet to make sure there's no problems. And other than that, yeah, no problem at all. Keith says, I have a Nios Quantum 120. Have you ever had crazy microbubbles escaping the bottom? I don't get it. I tried to watch the last stream but didn't hear this issue. Occasionally, like once out of my 2 Nio skimmers, I think I've seen that one time. Sometimes, I'm trying to think if I know a known cause. Like if the pump were to run in reverse accidentally, so it's cavitating and doing stuff the wrong direction, I think that could possibly cause it. When in doubt, I just take everything apart and clean it and reassemble it, and hopefully that will be the solution. You may come across something that you're like, or something wasn't quite in there tightly enough. But no, normally the bottom half of the skimmer is clear and all the bubbles are above it. So if you're looking and you're seeing bubbles down low, especially lots of them, maybe you can pinpoint where the bubbles are emanating from and correct that spot. Sorry, it's not something that happens all the time, so it's really hard for me to help you identify that. Dennis says, we bought a digital HANA salinity checker specifically for acclimating new fish. That's the easiest way to check salinity and shows instantly when salinity is in the bag when dripping. Great. Reef and Dive says, my son has an 8-liter closed triangle pico tank with Cassiopeias in it. That's awesome. Do you have any ideas on how to cool that tank? There's no temperature control, but sometimes they can get too hot. Cooling fan is usually the simplest. You set it right above, but you said the tank is closed. So that may be a challenge. But you know what? There's this guy in the Neptune group who does a lot of 3D printing of stuff. And he made a clip-on hanger that you would mount the cooling fan in, and it would send the fresh air up and down into the tank through a very narrow margin. And maybe something like that could be 3D printed to fit your tank to blow air in a very narrow slit and get it into the, to cool that water the right amount. You're going to need some kind of way to control it though, or you're going to have to play the game where you figure out exactly how many hours it has to be on per day. And that's challenging at first, but it's doable. I mean, think about it, right now you have nothing. So adding a fan, you want to make sure you don't cool the tank too much. So you have to find that sweet spot. Like it needs to come on at 3 in the afternoon and turn off at 9 p.m. And then during the summer, it may need to come on at 11 a.m. and go till 2 in the morning. You have to figure out what works best for that tank. There's also another thing out there called the Ice Probe, I think it's called. And it was a little tiny chiller device that went through a bulkhead or a uniseal. And so the outside was this, what do they call it, Pelham? It looks like a joystick from the Atari controller, and that joystick part, the handle, was actually the part that cools. And then the outside, I think it's Pelham is the name of that metal part on the outside where the heat is being exchanged. And I've seen people use that in many different small tanks and picos. And I've even seen them use it in a little bit larger tank where they jammed it in the side of the overflow box. So they could put it behind the aquarium and they could put it through the overflow box and it would cool inside and that thing was external. So maybe that thing could work. I think it was called the Ice Probe. So you could try that. Lincoln says, has anyone ever seen a snail with green on its shell? It almost looks like plating coral. It could be plating coral, or it could be possibly that you've got green coralline algae growing on the snail. Right now, some of my snails are actually pretty furry because my phosphates got way out of control. But I brought them down where they belong, and so eventually that should die back off, hopefully. Rick says, I added 3 Bengai cardinalfish to my anemone tank. I just added 5, as you know. And he said, I used Safety Stop and an acclimation box, learned it all from me. I'm glad that they worked well for you. I'm actually really enjoying the Bengais in the cube right now, and there's 5, and they're tiny. And the clownfish, I have no interest in them whatsoever. And all I want to do is add like 10 more. I'm not going to do it, but I'd love to put in even more just to see them. So there's one right there. Right there. I don't know if you can see it. It's just a crumb in blue light, so it's there. Oh, there's one there, there's one there. So there's 3 on the side of the tank. I see one in the very front corner. Anyway, they're really, really pretty. And it's funny because they're very boring fish. They're silver and black. But against the backdrop of all the green tentacles and the red tentacles and the orange clownfish, and it's really interesting. So I'm really liking that. Oh, Lincoln's updating. So the green stuff on the shell was almost honeycomb shape. Huh, well, I'm not sure, but you know what? If you posted a picture in Club Meals Reef, we could check it out, and we could help you figure out what it is. Joe says, after 2 years, I beat dinoflagellates. 2 years! Dinoflagellates are the worst. He said, I stopped water changes for a long time based on most of the advice. Tried a million things over 2 years. Yeah. He says, I finally found a common theme with the advice always comes back needing to get things back into balance. I started doing water changes again, and after no dinos after 4 weeks. Could it be that simple? Well, sometimes it really is about getting back to the basics, which is something I talked about a week or two ago, where I said unplug everything you don't need and just get it down to the one thing you do, the absolute essentials. Just simplify, and sometimes that will be the cure. But dinos are really hard to beat, so I'm not gonna give you that false hope that, oh, all you do is just clean the glass and it'll go away. That's not necessarily the case. Johnny says I don't age. Everyone on this channel says I do. But thank you, Johnny. Welcome back to the hobby. You can never leave. You can just take a break. Rafi says, I use the Trident. It's very good. I'm thinking about buying the Reef Pot. Any opinion on it, or have you already heard anything good or bad of it? Is it worth it? Well, it's kind of expensive. Last I checked, I think it was like $850 or more. But it lets you test the other things the Trident's not testing. So that's a good thing. And again, it's automation. We love automation. The one thing about automation that I've been trying to emphasize with you guys, and matter of fact, I was just thinking about Sanjay Yoshi today, because he, in his tank, he suddenly had a hammer coral lose its head. And it's been in his tank forever. And he said, why would this happen? It makes no sense at all. And in my own tank, I've lost a few hammer coral heads. And it's been frustrating to see these white glaring sticks sticking out of a bushy head of green hammer, the soft part. So I'm sure he has a Trident, just like you do. And having the Trident is good because it gives you information, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't test your water yourself at least once a week to verify. So if the Trident is telling you your alkalinity is 8.5, and you pull out a test kit and it's measuring 6, then you're getting a false reading from the Trident, and you're now that you know the number 6 and you bring it back up to where it belongs to 8.5, you can stop anything worse happening in your tank. So while I do love automation, I love the idea of the MindStream that was measuring the water every 15 minutes. I like that the Trident can measure every 6 hours. And all these different devices, the Reef Bot, I don't know how often you can make it run. I guess you run it as much until you run out of reagent. But these different devices, and the Alcatronic's another one. It's another device that measures alkalinity so frequently. If you have those hooked up, you just want to make sure the numbers you're getting are accurate. And if there's anything going wrong in your tank, I would not just look at all the automation and say, what does the automation say? I would double check with real test kits. I would pull out a real test kit, like this one for phosphate. And I would use my Smart Stir. This thing is awesome. I'm surprised you guys didn't buy them all up. I really expected them to go fast. They, hey, look, we lost our white balance. I look weird now. Anyway, the Smart Stir is a great device for measuring or doing your water test quickly, and it makes it more fun. And so I hate doing a test without some kind of magnetic stirrer now. I am so hopelessly spoiled. I'll probably never go back to just shaking a vial ever again. And I've been doing this for like 4 years now. This is a new product that came out. CoralView released it. It's from Auto Aqua, and I have them on my website for $30, and I ship them for $6, so it's $36. But back to you, Rafi. I want you to, I'm going to put this on the screen again. Go ahead and get the Reef Bot. I don't think you have anything to worry about. If there's any kind of problem, you can contact them for tech support, and you just have to find the test kits that match their, it has to be a liquid test, whatever you're measuring. If you're measuring nitrate or phosphate or potassium or something like that, it has to be an all-liquid test. And as long as they have it, something to test it with, you can run the Reef Bot in conjunction with your Trident, and you could have it do more tests, and you could have all your results on your phone any time of day or night. Nitrox says, can I add new live sand to an existing 75-gallon tank without issues? It's running low. Yes. Yeah, absolutely you can. What I'd like to do when you're adding new sand to a tank, I take the bag itself and I wipe it down so it's clean. The outside of it, just some kind of, just take a wet towel and just wipe it really clean. because then I'm going to turn off all the flow in the tank. I'm going to move any corals off the sand bed that are in my way, and I will cut open the bag, and I will turn it over and lower it into the tank, and then shake the bag out like you're shaking a pillow out of a pillowcase. And you will pour the sand into a nice mound, and then you can spread it out evenly. You basically want to add about a ½ inch across the entire sand bed. So you could add some in one area and some in another and some in a third. In my situation, I just kind of went right down the middle and moved it outward. But if you put a whole bunch on top of your existing live sand, you'll smother the live sand. So you have new live sand, but all your existing bacteria could take a hit. So by only putting a ½ inch on top of what you have now, you limit the chance of suffocating it. So you're adding biodiversity and not replacing it with new live sand. Does that make sense? If you don't want to add all the bag at once, you can put in less. There's different ways of doing it. I've seen people take a PVC pipe and pour it. It's just easier to just clean the bag and lower it in. And if you did half the bag and you feel like that's enough, you can still take the bag out and just fold the top over and tape it shut and save it for later. It's not like the tank water sneaks into the bag, the sand pours out. So I think that would work. It kind of does this thing where the bag contracts. It doesn't just like fill up with water as the sand is going out like you might imagine it could. Before I do that one, I had to laugh at that. But Variant says, who uses alkalinity with a new startup? I noticed my new tank had a drastic decrease in alkalinity, but not calcium. It depends what you're doing in your new tank. You didn't describe what your livestock situation is, because you could be setting up a brand new tank, but you transferred all your livestock into it, and they are alkalinity dependent, and they're going to absorb it rapidly, and it will suck it right out of the water really quickly as they're trying to grow. So you want to make sure that you're maintaining the proper alkalinity and calcium level in your tank through daily dosing. And so if you were setting up a brand new tank with dry sand, dry rock, you added the salt water, you waited a month, the cycle is over, and now you're putting in your first coral, no, your alkalinity is not something you have to dose. But if you put in 50 corals, or if you transferred in some colonies and the cleanup crew and fish, you would probably need to be dosing your alkalinity on a regular basis, typically daily. Some people like to break it up into multiple smaller doses throughout the day, but at the very least, you dose it daily. And I always recommend you dose alkalinity in the morning. Calcium doesn't come down nearly as quickly as alkalinity. Alkalinity is the one that can really get away from you. Squirmy Wiener says, that's why I laughed, I tried 3 days of blackout, dealing with cyanobacteria, and manual removing most, and then did a water change before lights out came back on, but the cyano still came back. I finally took your advice to not be a wimp and use the ChemiClean, and it worked like magic. Yeah, this stuff's great. Alex says, is there any benefit to growing mangroves? I want to place mangroves on my sump to raise pH at night. I'm going to say no. And I know that sounds very cut and dried. You're going to need a lot of mangroves to make a difference on pH. It's just not enough happening there. The mangroves are a terrestrial plant that do filter fresh water out of salt water, but for mangroves to help the pH go up, I think would be very optimistic. And I just picture you'd have to have a monster plant to actually have any kind of impact. I don't even know if it could. I really don't. I don't think it can because the roots are in the water and not the plant itself. So all the photosynthesis is happening outside of the water. So I think I changed my mind. It doesn't help pH whatsoever. And if you just want them because they're cool, you can do it. But if you're wanting to buffer your pH with a reverse light cycle, you need some kind of plant that's underwater, which is typically going to be Chaetomorpha, some type of Callirpa. There's some other macros on the market like Dragon's Breath that is really pretty. That may be able to do what you're looking for because those plants go through photosynthesis and they respirate and they are releasing oxygen in the water. They're using CO2 up. And that would be, you're needing some kind of a macroalgae, not a terrestrial plant. Echo says, my anemone is not happy. It's moving behind the rockscape. It's been in place for 3 months without moving, and today I woke up to it peeking out from behind the rock. Well, Echo, what you can do is you can take that rock that the anemone is on and you can turn it or spin it around and get it facing forward. It may just go to the back and then come back out to the front again. But anemones are not the smartest cookies in the batch. and they kind of do some dumb stuff, and sometimes they do it to their own detriment. You'd think they should know better. Like, why would you get away from the light source? But sometimes they do it. This tank has, I don't know how many anemones in it, and sometimes want to go under the rock and get way in there, and it's pointless. It's like, what are you doing? And then other times they'll be walking up the glass, trying to find some new spot, and they end up going back to where they came from in the first place. You may be lucky, and this anemone will travel back to where it came from, but if it doesn't, you may need to actually intervene and turn the rock to get it facing the right way so it's getting its daily dose of light, so it can still capture some food and look pretty. And the problem is when anemones start wandering, they may wander right into a power head and get sucked into the intake and get destroyed. And you don't want that to happen. So make sure any pumps you have in the tank, if they're Nero pumps, Vortec pumps, gyres, J-boat, whatever it is you have in your MaxiJet, make sure you have some kind of a sponge screen, some kind of mesh type bag over the intake. I know it's something you have to take off and clean, but it's a lot easier to take that off and clean it in the sink, rinsing it really well quickly for a minute each day, than to deal with the aftermath of an anemone that's torn to shreds inside a power head. So if it's starting to wander, protect your power heads from being, accosted, and also keep a watch on all your corals. Make sure they aren't getting stung by the anemone that's moved, because typically the anemone wins every battle, and whatever it touches, it kills, and it just leaves a trail of death behind it. Keith, you're very welcome. I mean, that's the point of this channel. So I hope that does help you. And you're just going to have to look and figure out what's going on. Sometimes one of the weirdest things we have to do to figure out what's wrong with a skimmer is to get down on our knees with a flashlight and look in the skimmer section and just look at everything and really shine light in there to see what's happening, exactly what's happening. Also, while you're down there, it's good to look in the return zone, which is supposed to be bubble-free, and look to make sure it's bubble-free. And if there are no bubbles in there, that's perfect. But if you see little bubbles blowing around in there, those bubbles end up going through the return nozzles into the display, and you have bubbles blowing everywhere, and it's ruining the view. And we don't want that to happen. I haven't done this in a while, so I'm going to go ahead and put on some video. All right. And then maybe I can do my picture-in-picture thing here if I can remember how to do it. Hey. I think I'm on there. All right, let's do that. That way you guys can enjoy the tank. Daryl says, I have a finger leather that's been closed up for 10 days now, and I tested calcium and it's measuring at 500. So you're running fresh carbon as well. What do you think? Well, definitely have too much calcium in that tank, and your leather is closed up because of it, probably. That does seem like a good correlation. A bigger water change with lower level calcium would be the best step in the right direction. You may need to do a few water changes to get that calcium to be used up, or be, not used up, but siphoned out and replaced with lower calcium. How do I say that? A new batch of water that is measuring less calcium. Like if you make a batch of salt water that measures 400, that's great. Use that and basically get your tank back down to 400. The range for calcium is 375 to 450. You're at 500, so you're not crazy high, but that leather being closed up for so long and then measuring 500 is probably a good correlation. Also, leathers do close up periodically because they're a coral that sheds. And then they slough off the skin that blows into the reef, and the fish eat it, and it lands elsewhere, or your filtration traps and removes it. So if you can go ahead and get your calcium level to come down some, that'd be best. Now, if you're dosing calcium, you should stop, obviously, and you don't resume it until you're back at the level you like. Reef and Dive, thank you very much for the super chat. Luke says, when using Live Rock Enhanced, should I turn off the skimmer for any length of time after using it or applying it? No, you don't have to turn off the skimmer. I think your skimmer's foam will collapse, so you can leave that running. That won't do anything bad, and it actually will help clean the inside of the skimmer a little tiny bit because it's a bacteria that consumes waste. If you're running UV, you turn that off for, I think it was 6 hours. But other than that, we leave everything running. So you don't have to disable anything else. Krista said, I just want to thank you for these live streams. I will be coming up on my 1-year anniversary soon with reefing, and you have helped so much. Hey, I'm glad it's helping you. I mean, that's the whole point. Mad Dogs wants to know if I'm starting to look like Santa Claus. I don't know. I don't see it. I don't know what you're talking about. D-Dot says, I started using Two Little Fishies Sea Balance, Part A and B. Do you have any experience? Yes, I actually used Sea Balance for a while. I really preferred B-Ionic from ESV, but Sea Balance has been around for a long time, and I kind of think it's the same stuff. Basically, these are liquid additives of the alkaline calcium. Now, some people want to save money, and so they prefer to buy powder and mix it with their own water to make their own alkalinity and calcium additive. But if you're wanting a bottle you can just pour in, buying a quart or a liter or whatever it is that comes in, and just putting in the measured amount each day, that's totally fine, and it's definitely trustworthy. You don't have to fear it's going to do any harm to your tank. This is all about dosing the right amount and doing your water test and verifying that you're not overdosing or underdosing. Skyman says, can the auto stir be used with Hannah? You mean the Hannah checker? Then no. The vial might fit, but it really fits the Red Sea vial the best. But I've also put in there the Elos vial. I've put in the API vial, which is a little tiny guy. And someone recently said they used, I think they said Nios was one that fit as well. So you've got a lot of different choices. But even if you didn't have any of them, if you happen to have one of the Red Sea beakers, this guy right here, that will fit inside the Smart Stir perfectly. I have mine on the table because I've been using it a bunch. Matter of fact, I'll talk about that for a minute here. But here's my little bead. And see, it fits in there nicely. And then if you're doing see, like here's the Elos vial. See, it's smaller. But it still fits in there. Just have to center it. Okay. Let me talk about alkalinity for a minute, because it's one of my favorite topics. I run into alkalinity stuff. It's really annoying, but it happens. So my tank's alkalinity had been dropping. So of course I went to the calcium reactor to check on it. I noticed that the media had got low. So I put in more media. I also buffered the tank with some soda ash to make up for the loss immediately while the calcium reactor was basically ramping it back up to normal speed. And I thought all was well in the world. But then I lost another head of my hammer coral. I was like, what is going on? So I, of course, check my alkalinity again. And I check it again. And I see it's coming down. And I thought, what is wrong now? Because I have a calcium reactor full of media. I have a CO2 tank full of gas. I mean, everything's running. And that's when I realized the one thing I forgot to check was how quickly the effluent was coming out of the calcium reactor. So I like to have it coming out of the tube at almost a trickle. Not a drip, not a stream, just a trickle. And it was actually coming out kind of slow. So I stuck my little urine specimen cup, because it has graduation marks on the side, and I clicked on the Versa Pumps calibration menu, and I stuck it in there and measured 1 minute, and it came out at 20 milliliters for the minute. But the Versa was programmed for 60 milliliters per minute. Hence, I found the problem. My tank wasn't getting nearly enough alkalinity because it was coming out so slowly. So I went through the calibration system, and it took me about 3 or 4 times to get it back to where 60 means 60. And now it's trickling on at its full strength, and my tank is 9.5 like it's supposed to be. But because there was this yo-yo, I lost some hammerheads, which is unfortunate. Not a lot, but there's a few. I mean, there's a spot right there that's gone. There's one right there that's not happy. And there's one on the other side. So it makes me mad that happened, but I've corrected it in the meantime. So when I tell you guys, if you're doing automation and you're using dosing pumps, you need to verify those dosing pumps are actually putting out the amount of liquid you are demanding daily. So from time to time, you need to actually check and put your little vial under there and measure what comes out during one dose and do your math and make sure it's still on track, or recalibrate them to make sure they're up to date, make sure your containers are full of fluid, make sure that the ends of the tubing aren't clogged shut. These are all those little things you have to do if you want to automate. Now, if you don't automate and you just take the stuff and you pour it into a little tiny thing, and then you trickle it into your tank, nothing can go wrong other than you forgetting to pour it in the tank. But there's no gear to keep track of. So that's why I'm saying sometimes simplifying everything is the best approach to solving a problem. Chili Wills says, have you ever heard of anyone using or putting hydrogen peroxide in their auto top-off? No? What would that do? Christoph says, what are your experiences with the Ecotech Ecotech Vortec pumps? I've been using the Vortec pumps since they came out. I was actually on the beta tester list in the very early days. I think it was 2007? Feels like 2006, but it's probably 2007. And so I got one of the very first pumps. And those pumps originally, they were designed a little bit differently. And they had a rubber circle that went between the pump and the glass. And it was a bright orange circle. And so when you had it on there, you could see the orange. And now with this one, you see black because they changed that. But no, I love the Vortex. They have a much smaller footprint in the tank. Even in this video, you can see one Vortex on the far right under that flow accelerator. And on the left, right under my picture-in-picture, there's one of the MP60s. I've been running the MP60s since 2011. I've been running MP40s since the beginning. I've also run MP10s. I love the Vortex. I think they're great. I always recommend having an extra wet side that's clean. So when you want to clean that one, you take the clean one, you put it in the tank, you take the dirty one out, soak it, scrub it up, put it together, and have it ready for the next one. And you can cycle through the different ones. The Anemone Cube has only one power head on it, and that's the Vortec. It's the MP40. So I really like them. I think they're great. They are all plugged into battery backups to keep the flow in the tank if there's a power outage. I've been using EcoSmart Live forever to run them, but now Mobius can talk to them, and you can program everything from your phone. I haven't got any of mine hooked up to Mobius yet. They work, so why would I change anything? But I'm very happy with them, and when I need to get a new one, I just get another one. I don't think about getting some other brand. I really do like them a lot. Johnny says, how soon can or should I run a UV on my new tank after cycling? Well, I probably wouldn't even run it until like month 3 or number 4 possibly. There's actually a video on this that a live stream that I did this year called Let's Talk About the Reef Timeline, and you should really watch that one. It's really important because it helps you kind of figure out what's going to happen month after month all the way through like the first 18 months. And UV is not something you need right off the bat. And I would hold off on that, but that's a whole other discussion. And I don't see the benefit of hooking it up early. You might think, well, yeah, but I'm going to buy a bunch of fish and I need UV to fight off all the horrible things. But shouldn't run it too soon because you also need a lot of bacteria in your tank to handle the life support, and anything that passes through that tube that goes over that light will be killed. So all your beneficial bacteria, all the things that you're wanting in there will be killed off as they pass through. And it could actually limit the bioload your tank can handle. So I would hold off, and I would really watch that Reef Timeline video. Dennis says, what do you think about my 2 videos about corals in Club Miller's Reef? I didn't see the one about the Duncan yet. I saw the hammer one, looked nice, but I didn't have the audio one, so I didn't listen. But I liked what you did initially. It was nice, quick, and to the point. And it's perfect. It's the kind of thing we need on the web to help people. So I will look for the Duncan one, and I will listen if there's any audio, and I'll give you some feedback. Sound good? Julie says, I recently put in my first SPS frags. 10 pieces. Should I feed them, and how long before I see any growth? Okay, so SPS corals are small polyp stonies, and they take time to grow. They can sit there and do nothing for a super long time, or you could see some new growth within a matter of weeks. But initially, they're going to do very little because they were just handled by you. Maybe you dipped them, and then you glued them, and you pushed them into a rock, and you held the coral when you did it, and there was putty involved. There's new flow, new lights, new fish. Everything's different than where that coral came from, and it's going to take some time to settle in. But if you take a picture of that coral today, and then you take another picture of that exact coral the exact same way a month from now, you could then compare the 2 images and see if you see any growth. a lot of questions that I see, well, I say not a lot, but I frequently see people posting a picture of an SPS coral with a white tip, and they say, is this growth or is it dying? And most SPS corals, the very tip is going to be white because it's new flesh that hasn't grown the symbiotic algae within it to get the coloration. And that is completely normal. And as I look at my own tank, as I look at my corals, like there's a big acro right behind me. It's actually here in the middle of the, right above the yellow tank in the video right now. All the tips on that acropore are white or light blue. But then as it grows, the main branch is much more of a deeper blue-green color, and the tips will always be lighter. And that is new growth. And if you're doing everything right and your water's super stable, you'll continue to see new growth, and those little sticks will turn into little tiny mini colonies, and you leave them alone for a while, and they grow into a nice little colony, and then you end up having this beautiful reef one day. So the most important part about what you're doing is to keep your hands out of the tank as much as possible, not to mess with them, and maintain super stable water quality. And congrats on your new babies. Sizzle Reef says, anyone use the Smart Stir product with the Salifert kits? The Salifert beaker is what won't fit the Smart Stir because it's kind of a square base. But you can do the exact test inside any beaker, inside the Smart Stir, and then you could pour it into the Salifert beaker to set it on your card to measure. I even do that with like the API. Well, yeah, even with API, or when I do ELOS and I'm measuring my phosphate. So when I'm done, I'm supposed to have a vial that looks like this, that's got this light blue stuff, and you're supposed to look down from above. Well, I can't take this vial that's thicker and wider because the liquid would be shallower. I wouldn't get the same effect. So I do this to run the test. I pour it into the correct vial, put it on the card, and look at the color. So that is the only reason Salifert doesn't work, is just the beaker doesn't fit. But the test will work just fine. Odile says, how easy are rock anemones? They are pretty simple, actually. You can put them where you like. They tend to stay in one spot, and they can be fed, and they're really colorful, and they come in so many, well, that's what I was going to say, they're really colorful. They come in so many colors, you can actually have this really cool blanket of them. You know, they're kind of expensive. You know, you buy this little tiny guy this big, and it might be 30, 40 bucks a piece, and let's say you like 12 colors, that adds up, right? But they're a great splash of color. They look great in nano tanks. They can potentially eat a small fish because they're super sticky, and there's no clown that can swim in it. So don't hope for that. But no, they're not hard to keep. They're a really nice addition. Luke says, I just adopted a carpet anemone. I know it can bother or even kill other types, but my Aptasia right next to him seems unscathed. Yeah, Aptasia are like the cockroach of the tank. Nothing kills them, right? Alex says, is there anything from tap water that can bypass the RODI? Yeah, actually there are. And the thing is, as the water coming out of the tap water, out of the city pipes, or out of the ground, out of a well, if the level of something is way high, it's more than the RODI system can pull out. So there are some occasions where people will discover, even though they ran all their stuff through all the filters and the membrane and the DI resin, they still had something that was causing a problem in their tank. For example, there was a lady here in my club who lived in a subdivision where they were building a new subdivision next to her, and the guys that ran all the pipes in the ground, they poured pure ammonia in those brand new pipes to get it ready for humans, and some of that got backed up into the water supply of the old subdivision and went straight through her RODI system, and the ammonia killed her tank. Twice. So if the ammonia level's crazy high, the RO unit can't pull it out. But should it ever be that high? No, that's completely uncharacteristic. It was a weird circumstance, twice, but it happened in her area. And at that point, she said, I will never, ever make RODI water and not test the output for ammonia to make sure I'm good to go. And I was thinking, how frustrating is that you have to do this stupid extra step because the city keeps messing with the pipes? But yeah, there's a possibility something could go wrong. Another weird story, and I've told some of these before, so some of you know these. There was a fish store in Dallas that had their meter replaced on the building. And when they cut out the old one and put the new one in, they sweat in the meter, and it was copper, and that copper went straight through the pipes, straight through the RODI system, and killed all their cleaner shrimp that they were selling. And they lost like 30 in one day. And they measured the tank and it was full of copper. And like, how is this even possible? It was so high the RODI couldn't handle it. But the normal minuscule level of copper that may be in tap water is removed normally through reverse osmosis and deionization. So is it possible? Yes, something can get through. Is it common? No. But it's good to keep your eye on things and make sure it doesn't get you. Squirmy Wiener says, I love this name. How do you personally combat humidity with all that water inside your house? Do you do a combination of open windows and a dehumidifier? I'm finding it hard to leave my window open all the time with colder temperatures. I never open windows or doors. I like to re-breathe the same air for the rest of my life. I do have a dehumidifier. We haven't had much rain, so it hasn't been running much, but earlier this year I was pulling out water left and right out of the house. And for now, I like to run the dehumidifier at night when I'm asleep. So I would go ahead and plug it in. It's kind of a large roll-around unit that sucks moisture out of the air. It collects it in a bin underneath, and it blows air, because it's sucking air through it. It blows air into the room. So especially in the winter, if you're sitting in a room next to a dehumidifier that's running, you feel cold because it's making wind in the vicinity, and it's really annoying. Plus, it's loud. So I like to plug that thing in late at night while I'm asleep and let it do its thing. And usually, especially in very humid conditions, besides my tank, but the outside weather, it can fill up in 10 to 12 hours and be already turned off again because it's maxed out, and I have to dump it out and turn it on again. But we've not had a lot of rain, and I haven't noticed a lot of moisture situations in the house. So it hasn't been plugged in for the last month or so. It's been pretty nice and quiet. Reef Doink says, have you heard of anyone using red-colored flashlights at nighttime? Supposedly it doesn't disturb the livestock in the tank. Yeah, you're right. You can use a red light because the fish and the inverts don't see that spectrum, and it's a great way to spot all kinds of cool critters in your tank. Albert Thiel was selling the Reef Torch, which is a little tiny red flashlight that had a red LED in it, and he used these microscopic batteries like you use for a, what do you call it? The ear amplifiers older people use, those little tiny batteries, and you could go and look at your whole tank with a red light, and it was really, really nice. Luke says, the most I'm worried about is losing that tiny little bead. I know, it's microscopic on the Smart Stir. That's why I like to keep it either inside the beaker itself, or I set it where it's inside the base, so now it's sitting right there. And that is, it always is there. I make sure I always put it there when I'm done. The biggest fear for me is dropping it down the drain of the sink, but I've never done that. Aaron White says, are there any tips on working out how much kalkwasser to dose? I'm sure there's some kind of calculator out there. Matter of fact, the Reef Chemistry Calculator probably could tell you exactly what you need to know. I don't use kalkwasser, so I've never tried to do that kind of math to crunch out what your tank would need. The only thing I want to tell you about dosing kalkwasser, well, I'll tell you a couple things. I don't like kalkwasser for a number of reasons. The first one is it's so messy. It's got a really high pH. It's got a pH of 12. And if anything goes wrong and all your kalkwasser goes into the tank in one session, it can kill your tank. So it's why I really don't like that stuff. It's just super dangerous. But let's say you set it up with triple redundancy and there's absolutely no way it can go wrong, and it's only putting in a fixed amount, then you should be okay. But you need to determine how much your tank needs. And like you said, you'll have to maybe use the Reef Chemistry Calculator. I don't like using it as top-off because our top-off volume of water being used per day varies. And it varies per season. It just depends on what's going on. So for example, if your tank is used to receiving 3 gallons of kalkwasser a day and your corals are doing really well, and then you hit a period when your tank is only using 2 gallons of top-off per day, it's getting 1/3 less kalkwasser. And your corals may start to decline, and you don't know why, because everything's the same. Well, no, actually it's not. You're using 1/3 less kalkwasser for that day, every single day, for a duration. And then there may be a time when you are using 4 gallons of water per day to keep up because the evaporation rate is so high. And now you're putting in too much kalkwasser. So we want to make sure that you're very careful. So I'd rather see you just top off with top-off water and dose whatever it is. Like if I was using kalkwasser in my tank, a random number that comes to my head is I would dose 1 gallon of kalkwasser per day. And that would be with a dosing pump. And I still would not have like a 55-gallon barrel of that stuff on my reef because it's just too risky that all 55 gallons somehow gets into my tank. I would rather it be like maybe 5 gallons available. So I have 5 days worth. And that way, in theory, if something were to go wrong, the absolute worst case would be every drop went in from day one. But maybe 3 days in, it puts in 2 gallons accidentally instead of 1. But you just want to be really careful because kalkwasser kills reef tanks. And I know everyone's like, what? I've been using it forever. It's totally safe. It's not safe. It's very dangerous. And I read hundreds and hundreds of threads in the early 2000s of people that their tank turned to milk and everything died. And it was that kind of stuff that I saw so much made me think I never want to run it. But I did try it out for about 3 weeks on my 280-gallon reef. And I just decided it wasn't worth the trouble. It definitely wasn't worth the cleanup. And it was just a hassle. And there was just too much chance. And I just didn't feel safe with it. So I chose not to use it. And I don't really recommend it. But I understand some people like to use it. So I just want you to have enough knowledge that you can kind of maybe outwit the thing we call Murphy's Law and avoid having a bad situation happen with your tank. Gurchin says, how do I prevent plating and crusty montipores from covering the rock work, or how do I remove it? Well, the fact that you know it's encrusting tells you it's going to cover your rock work. So that's kind of an impossibility. I mean, that's what it's designed to do. That's what it does. You can have that coral on its own rock, like sort of like an island on the rockwork, on the sand bed, and that way it just does this thing and encrusts the entire rock and has nowhere to go. And then it'll start to grow out on the sand. You can break off the edges and kind of keep this rock of coral that you like. But the encrusting corals are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, and there's not really a way to stop it or prevent it. You can break off edges, and you can I guess apply glue on a spot where two corals are getting near each other. But the plating ones are easier because they tend to scroll or go out in a shelf. And again, you can trim those. But the other choice is not to have montipore if that is really a problem in your tank. Marcus says, I love the Vortec pumps. Unfortunately, the casing around my magnet on the MP10 cracked all the way around and was rusting. Just shows that nothing lasts forever and to carefully inspect your gear. I completely agree with you, and I know I've thrown away, I don't know, probably 8 different wet sides in the last 13 years out of all my tanks. And yeah, I always inspect them, and if I find a bad one, I throw away that one and I get a new wet side. Usually I have one ready. I actually use wet sides, or the magnet from the wet side. They were actually rejected magnets from Ecotech to glue the sumps together. I use them to hold the acrylic in place. Ah, thank you, Echo. An ear amplifier, you know, a hearing aid. I couldn't think of the term. I don't know. You try doing this stuff on live camera and see how you do. Some things just fall out of my head. It's dumb. I know. Let's see. Johnny says, how do you feel about just using kalkwasser to dose a tank instead of 2-part? Which is better? Just trying to see which would be better for me when I start dosing. Kalkwasser was the way to maintain numbers through replacing water of evaporation. I was talking about this a few minutes ago. That was the method done in the early, well, I'd say in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And it was considered, you know, a very inexpensive way to maintain things to avoid having to buy a calcium reactor. But then later, the 2-part powders became available from Randy Holmes Farley's article, where he taught us all how we could make our own 2-part. And we discovered we could take a pound of baking soda and we could bake it. We could get, you know, whatever it is, 1.5 pounds of calcium chloride. We could get, there was this stuff called ice melt that was made for the East Coast to put on the driveways, and it was magnesium chloride. and you could mix that. And we've discovered with these cheap powders, we can make our own and quit having to buy expensive solutions. And to this day, you can still buy those mixes. I sell those mixes on my website. The Frank's Brew is on my website, and I have the DIY alkaline calcium magnesium, and you mix them up in 1 gallon jugs, and then you dose from that into your tank until it's empty, and you make another batch. It's more controllable than kalkwasser. Kalkwasser, you can't really control anything because it's maintaining. You basically have to get the tank's alkaline calcium to the right level, and then keep dosing the right amount of kalkwasser per day to keep it there. But like I said, if your evaporation rate changes and you're not putting in as much, or if it suddenly puts in a whole bunch, it will kind of throw things out of whack. But it's not one thing or the other. It is maintaining the entire water collective, where when you're dosing alkalinity, you can turn up the alkalinity a little bit. You can turn the calcium down. You can add magnesium sporadically, because these are 3 separate elements rather than one all-in-one type of thing. So I would definitely recommend using 3-part. You said 2-part, but it's really 3-part. Jose says, in your opinion, are 2 Kessel A160s good enough for a 30-gallon shallow reef tank that's 24 by 24 by 12? Yeah, I think so. I think you could do that. D-Dot says, my Favia has a big bubble on it, like a bounce Favia. Any idea, or do I sell it for $1,000 right now? I don't have an idea, but I'd love to see a picture of it. Sometimes things are splitting, but not on a Favia. The bubble thing sounds a little weird. I'd like to see it. Lewis says, my alkaline is 12 DKH with a Hannah checker. How do I lower it? Usually lowering is by not dosing. So by not dosing alkaline to your tank for a few days, that number should come down gradually. And then, of course, if you do a water change today with water that has less alkaline in it, it'll come down a little bit more rapidly. Smoking Reefer says, will caulk in the auto top-off tank help with the white slime stuff that builds up? Actually, kalkwasser kind of makes a white slime everywhere, so that wouldn't help with anything. Tim says, I'm setting up a small 20-gallon long to transfer my coral into while I deal with some problems in my display tank. Any tips on making sure my corals don't die in the 20-gallon? I have mostly acros. Oh, this is so hard what you're trying to do. It's all about stability. If you can make that 20-gallon rock solid and everything's just perfect day in after day out, the SPS corals may tolerate it. It's really, really hard to do, but because it's a very small body of water. I hope you can solve the problems in your tank and get those corals back in your tank soon. Aaron says, how long do you keep your mixed salt water for? Months. Months and months and months. I have the 265-gallon poly tank that is just, at whatever level. Like right now, there's about 190 gallons of salt water in there. And I made that 2-3 months ago. And what I'll do when I'm going to do my water change is I will check it for alkalinity and temperature, and then buffer it to whatever it needs to be to get it right, and then I can do my big water change. It's always in circulation and it's sealed, so there's nothing to get in to contaminate it, and it's not stagnant, and that's why it'll last. I mean, it's just like even water in your aquarium. You don't sit there and say, well, how long has that water been in the tank? And then Dennis wants to be argumentative today. He says, I love my kalkwasser. I dose it through a Kimura FXSP2 at 6 milliliters per minute, and it works magic for pH. If something goes wrong with my pH, the controller stops the Kimura pump. That's good. See, you've got something in there to protect against an overdose. That's really important. All right, that is it for our question and answers for today. I'm going to wrap this up a little bit. I have things to do. I just can't stay on here like I used to in the old days. We've only been at this for 1 hour and 24 minutes, and we're finishing up. That's crazy talk. Today is Water Test Saturday. It's really important that you do test your water. We've been talking about a lot of stuff today that actually involves testing your water, and that's because water tests save lives. And we want to make sure that our reef and our fishes are healthy and happy, and the only way to do that is to use your test kits. Now, before you say, I don't have time, I got things to do, I just saved you time because you're not still sitting here listening to this live stream. You suddenly have 20 free minutes you didn't think you'd have today, do you? So go ahead and test your water and make sure you've tested alkalinity and calcium and magnesium, nitrate and phosphate, salinity, temperature. Those are the big ones we care about. You can definitely enter those parameters into your Reef Trace app. I recommend that app because it's awesome, and you can actually see trends of how your water's been doing over time. You can enter in your favorite test kits. You can use the reef notes to keep track of things you've added to the tank or removed or changed or replaced or cleaned. There's a lot of good stuff in that app. And of course, I love the LFS locator because no matter where you are, when you open up that app, it will show you whatever's within a 45-mile radius of you. So hopefully there are, and that is always being constantly updated. So if there's a store missing, you can actually recommend it to be added. And if one has gone out of business and they're gone, you can let us know. So the idea is to keep that thing super accurate. So we definitely want to do that. And it's crazy, when I look at the map of Dallas-Fort Worth, there are so many little markers. We have so many stores in our area. And it makes me want to go visit them all. So please do test your water. Don't be lazy. Don't just say everything's fine. Make sure you know for a fact. So I saw someone posting on Facebook a couple days ago. I don't remember when's the last time I tested nitrate or phosphate. Those are my two worst numbers. I test them all the time. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great Christmas. I will not see you next weekend, but I am online on Club Meals Reef, and I will probably see you guys on, I think the next live stream will land like on New Year's Day or something like that. So that should happen unless for some reason I'm traveling. But other than that, I'll see you guys when I do. I will definitely update you if there's going to be another cancellation of a stream. And I hope the rest of this year goes well for you and that you stay safe. Bye, guys.